Welcome back to Philosophy Hub, specifically to the Philosophy Cafe. It is really good to have you sitting down with us for another deep dive today.
It really is. And the file we are opening today is, well, it sits right at this very uncomfortable intersection of history and biology and, honestly, the way we all vote.
Yeah, we usually like to think of our political beliefs as these carefully constructed towers of logic, built on a really solid foundation of our values and our lived experiences.
Right. But the research we have in front of us today suggests something entirely different. It suggests that foundation might actually be built on dopamine levels, historical parasite exposure, and even how our ancestors handled starvation.
It's a deeply provocative stack of research, to be sure. We are navigating the work of researcher Leor Zmigrod and her book, The Ideological Brain.
It is a heavy topic. I mean, it challenges our fundamental sense of agency. But before we get to the brain scans and the genetics, we actually have to start with a story about a bridge.
Right, and not just any bridge. We are talking about a bridge too far. For the history buffs tuning in, you'll know this is the classic reference to Cornelius Ryan's book and the 1977 film about Operation Market Garden in World War II.
Setting the scene, it's September 1944. The Allies are feeling confident, perhaps a little too confident, and they hatched this massive, incredibly ambitious plan to end the war by Christmas.
The scale of it was just unprecedented. The strategy involved dropping thousands of paratroopers behind enemy lines in the Netherlands to capture a very specific series of bridges.
The idea being to create a sort of carpet of airborne troops, so the ground forces could roll right across the Rhine and directly into Germany, totally bypassing the heavy defenses.
But it failed. Specifically, it failed at the final bridge in Arnhem.
Exactly. The paratroopers were dropped, but the ground forces just couldn't get there in time.
The troops were cut off, surrounded by panzer divisions, and there is that famous moment where General Frederick Browning, who had been, he'd been worried about the logistics from the start, he famously tells Field Marshal Montgomery, "I think we may be going a bridge too far."
And that phrase, a bridge too far, it has really stuck with us as the ultimate metaphor for overreach, for trying to span a distance that is simply too wide to be crossed.
Which brings us to the central question of our deep dive today. We are looking at the distance between hard science, neurons, enzymes, genetics, and soft social science like liberalism, fascism, religious fundamentalism.
The profound question is, can we really explain our complex political beliefs by looking at our biology? Or is that scientific ambition simply a bridge too far?
It is a massive question for us to chew on, because if the bridge can be built, if our voting habits are truly rooted in our biology, well, that changes everything about how we argue, how we view our opponents, and ultimately how we understand ourselves.
It does. But to start building this bridge, we actually have to go back to the Netherlands. Not to the military operation itself, but to the immediate, really tragic aftermath of that failure.
Yes, the Hunger Winter. The Hunger Winter of 1944 to 1945. Because the Allies failed to secure that bridge at Arnhem, the northern part of the Netherlands remained under Nazi control.
And in retaliation for a railway strike, the Nazis enforced a brutal blockade. Food supplies were completely cut off to the civilian population.
The details in the source material are just harrowing. We're talking about daily calorie intake dropping below 400 per person.
People were eating tulip bulbs and sugar beets just to survive the freezing cold.
And this famine affected everyone, including a very specific demographic that became the focus of a major study: pregnant women.
This was a profound tragedy, but decades later it created a grim sort of natural experiment. A researcher named Ezra Susser utilized the Dutch birth registry, which incredibly was impeccably kept despite the chaos of the war.
To track the children who were in the womb during that specific window of starvation, right?
Exactly. He tracked them decades into the future. Now, you would obviously expect these famine babies to have physical health problems later in life. Diabetes, heart issues, metabolic disorders.
And they did. But Susser found something else, something that links directly to our philosophical exploration today.
He found that the starvation actually affected the architecture of their minds. 20 years later, the children exposed to that famine in the womb had significantly higher rates of schizophrenia and antisocial personality disorders.
So a biological shock, a severe lack of nutrients to a developing fetus, didn't just change their body. It fundamentally rewired their personality and mental health outcomes decades later.
It established a powerful proof of concept. Biology shapes psychology in profound, incredibly long-lasting ways.
And if a blunt instrument like starvation can alter the mind, researchers like Zmigrod started wondering about more subtle biological pressures.
Right. Could things like disease or genetic variations shape not just our health, but our politics.
Which brings us to one of the most surprising sections of the research, the connection between pathogens and politics. This is known as the Parasite Stress Theory.
It sounds a bit like science fiction at first, but the data is quite robust. Zmigrod and her colleagues analyzed data from 46 different countries, as well as across the United States.
And what exactly were they looking for?
They were looking for a correlation between the prevalence of infectious diseases, things like malaria, typhus, leprosy, and the type of government or political attitudes dominant in those regions.
And they actually found a correlation.
A very strong one. The higher the prevalence of infectious disease in a region, the more likely that region is to support authoritarian governance and adhere to strict conservative social norms.
Okay, let's unpack the logic here, because we know correlation isn't causation. Why would having malaria in the neighborhood make a population want a dictator?
You really have to look at it through the lens of evolution. It is called the behavioral immune system. If you are living in an environment where deadly pathogens are rampant, strangers are inherently dangerous.
Because strangers might carry new diseases that your isolated group does not have immunity to.
Precisely. In a high pathogen environment, the safest strategy is to close the gates. You become xenophobic, not necessarily out of malice initially, but out of strict biological self-preservation.
You prefer strict rules to ensure hygiene. You punish rule breakers harshly because a broken rule could mean an outbreak.
Yes, and you want a strong, authoritarian leader who promises to secure the borders and keep the outside out.
So what we call authoritarianism or strict social conservatism might actually be, at its very root, a biological defense mechanism against environmental threats.
That is the theory the data points toward. It suggests that our political leanings might be hijacked by our brain's ancient attempt to keep us from getting sick. It really reframes prejudice from a purely moral failing to a misfiring survival instinct.
That is a crucial, compassionate distinction to make, but we need to be careful with our terms here. We keep saying ideology in politics, but we aren't just talking about, Democrats versus Republicans, are we?
Not at all.
Because Zmigrod's work seems to suggest something much more fundamental about how the brain works, regardless of which specific party you support.
You are absolutely right. This is where we really have to separate the content of the belief from the structure of the belief. Historically, the term ideology has been thrown around a lot.
Right. It was originally coined by a French philosopher, Destutt de Tracy, during the Enlightenment, simply as the science of ideas.
Yes, but later, Napoleon weaponized the term. He used to call people ideologues as an insult if they were unrealistic, overly theoretical intellectuals.
Which is pretty much exactly how we use it today. We say, oh, stop being so ideological.
Exactly. But Zmigrod proposes we look at the structure. Ideology isn't about what you believe, whether you want lower taxes or universal health care. It is about how you believe it.
The architecture of the thought itself.
Yes. She identifies two main components of the ideological brain.
Let's break those down for the listener.
The first is dogmatism. This is cognitive rigidity. It is the refusal to update your beliefs, even when presented with new contradictory evidence. If the facts change, but your opinion remains entirely frozen, that is dogmatism.
And the second component?
The second is relational. This involves intense in-group love and out-group hate. A key marker here is the use of kinship metaphors for non-relatives.
Ah, like seeing religious groups calling each other brother and sister.
Or in intense political movements where the party members are comrades or patriots, and literally everyone else is an enemy or a traitor.
So under this structural definition, you could have a radical left-wing revolutionary and a radical right-wing nationalist who absolutely hate each other, but their brains are actually doing the exact same thing.
Structurally, yes. They share the same operating system, high dogmatism and intense tribalism. They just happen to have different software installed.
That is fascinating.
And the most compelling part of Zmigrod's work is that we can actually measure this operating system without ever asking a single political question.
This was the part of the research I found most engaging, the cognitive tests. Because they are completely apolitical. They are essentially just puzzle games.
They are objective measures of cognitive flexibility. Take the Wisconsin card sorting test. It is a classic tool in psychology. You are given a deck of cards with different shapes, colors, and numbers, and you are asked to sort them.
Okay, so maybe you start sorting by color, putting the red cards with the red cards.
Right, you get into a rhythm. But then, completely without warning, the rule changes. The tester secretly decides that color is now wrong, and shape is the correct sorting rule.
And they don't tell you the new rule.
No, they just tell you, incorrect when you put down a red card.
So you have to figure it out on the fly. You have to abandon the old rule you were comfortable with and hunt for the new one?
Exactly. And the test measures how fast your brain can make that switch. Flexible thinkers pivot almost immediately. They realize the pattern is broken and they adapt.
But rigid thinkers?
They get stuck. They keep sorting by color, even when they are repeatedly being told it is wrong. They fundamentally struggle to update the rule in their head.
It is like their brain has too much momentum in one specific direction and the brakes just don't work.
Yes. Then there is the remote association test.
Oh, I love these. I am going to put you on the spot here with one.
Let's see if my brain is feeling flexible today.
Okay, I will give you 3 words, and you have to find the 4th word that links them all together. Man, blue, glue.
Superman, super blue, super glue.
Perfect. But apparently, rigid thinkers really struggle with that kind of leap.
They do, because it requires lateral thinking. You have to step outside the literal categorical definition of the word man and the word blue to find the hidden connection. Rigid thinkers tend to stay locked in those literal categories.
And then there's the most practical one, the alternative uses test.
This is simply handing someone a mundane object like a brick and asking, how many ways can you use this? A rigid thinker looks at it and says, well, it is for building a wall, maybe making a pathway. And that is it.
Whereas a flexible thinker sees,
Well, a paperweight,
a weapon.
a doorstop. You could grind it up to make red powder pigment for paint. You could stand on it to see over a fence. Flexible thinkers see the potential in the object. Rigid thinkers only see the designated traditional purpose.
And Zmigrod found a direct statistical link between these simple brick and card games and actual voting behavior.
She did. People who score low on these creativity and flexibility tests, the people who only ever see a brick as a brick, are statistically much more likely to be ideological extremists.
Wow.
This applies across the board to religious fundamentalists, fervent nationalists, and rigid activists on both sides of the political spectrum.
It implies that political stubbornness isn't just an attitude problem or a lack of education. It is an actual processing limitation. They literally perceive the world differently.
Even visually. They found this with basic optical illusions, like that classic image that looks like a duck or a rabbit depending on how you focus your eyes. Flexible people can switch between seeing the duck and the rabbit easily.
But rigid people get stuck on one interpretation.
Yes. They literally cannot see the other perspective, even when they know it's supposed to be there.
That gives a whole new, deeply biological weight to the term political polarization. But why? We talked about starvation and parasites in our ancestors, but for the average person walking around today, what are the mechanics of this rigidity? Is it genetic?
We have to talk about dopamine, specifically a gene called COMT. You can think of this gene as the groundskeeper for your brain's chemistry. Its primary job is to break down dopamine in the prefrontal cortex.
And the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain responsible for planning, complex decision-making, higher thought. But we usually hear about dopamine just as the reward chemical, the thing that makes us feel good.
It is that, but in the prefrontal cortex, it is more about signal transmission. The research suggests that a specific variation of the COMT gene, the MET allele, leads to lower activity of this groundskeeper enzyme.
Meaning the dopamine is broken down slower.
Yes, so you end up with higher baseline levels of dopamine in the prefrontal cortex.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It is an evolutionary trade-off. High dopamine in the prefrontal cortex can mean you are incredibly focused, your thoughts are stable, but it can also mean your thoughts are sticky. It is much harder to let go of an idea once you have it.
So your brain grips onto the rule of sorting by color and just won't let go.
Exactly. Conversely, the VAL allele variation breaks dopamine down much faster, which might make you more cognitively flexible, but perhaps less focused and more easily distracted.
So, simply put, some of us are genetically predisposed to be mentally flexible, and others are predisposed to be mentally rigid.
That absolutely appears to be the case based on the neurobiology.
Listening to this, it is very easy to fall into the trap of thinking, okay, so flexibility is the good trait and rigidity is a defect. We culturally value creativity and openness. But here at the Philosophy Cafe, we know nothing is ever quite that simple.
It rarely is.
You mentioned a Greek concept in the notes for this deep dive that I think is essential for us to bring in here, the Pharmakon.
Yes, the Pharmakon. It is a really profound concept from ancient Greek philosophy that thinkers like Derrida later expanded on. It translates to mean both poison and cure simultaneously.
The exact same substance.
Yes. The difference between poison and cure is often just the dosage or the context in which it's applied. we must be very careful not to pathologize rigid thinking as purely negative.
So how is rigidity a cure? What is the upside of being a sticky, rigid thinker?
Loyalty, deep dedication, self-sacrifice. The research indicates that rigid thinkers are significantly more willing to suffer and even die for their group or their chosen cause.
That makes sense.
If your society is under attack, or if you're trying to preserve a community through incredibly hard times, do you really want a philosopher at the gate who sees all sides of the argument and wants to debate the nuance of the invading enemy's perspective?
Probably not. You want someone who sees a brick purely as a wall and who sees their group as brothers and sisters worth dying for.
Exactly. Evolution has likely preserved both types of minds because a successful, enduring society requires both. We need the flexible thinkers to innovate, to invent the wheel, to negotiate complex peace treaties.
But we need the rigid thinkers to defend the village, to maintain social cohesion, and to uphold the traditions that keep the community grounded.
It creates a kind of perpetual existential tension in our societies. We annoy each other constantly. The flexible thinkers think the rigid thinkers are stuck in the past. The rigid thinkers think the flexible ones are flaky and disloyal.
But we might actually deeply need each other to survive as a species.
It is a profound symbiotic relationship, even if it usually just feels like a shouting match.
I love that framing. Before we move on, I want to take a quick second to say, if you are finding value in this deep dive, in unpacking the hidden architecture of the mind, please take a moment to support the Philosophy Cafe mission. Like, share, pass this conversation along to a friend.
Perhaps a friend who acts a little too rigid or a little too flexible.
Exactly. It really helps us keep the lights on and keeps this kind of deep research coming your way. Now, I want to pivot back to the environment one more time. We talked about genetics and ancient history, but what about right now?
You mean in our daily lives?
Yeah. If I am generally a flexible thinker, but I have a terrible, highly stressful week, does my brain change? Can I temporarily become more rigid?
Absolutely. The structure of your mind is not entirely set in stone. Stress is a massive, immediate factor in cognitive rigidity. There was a brilliant study involving toddlers, 15-month-old babies, that illustrates this perfectly.
Walk us through it.
They gave the babies a simple toy with a button. You press the button, it makes a fun sound.
Simple enough cause and effect.
Then, the researchers intentionally broke the button. It just stopped working. The babies who were in a calm, secure state were flexible. They tried a new button, or they just moved on to a completely different toy.
They adapted to the new reality.
But the babies who had just experienced separation stress, meaning their mothers had left the room briefly right before the test, they did something very different.
What did they do?
They kept obsessively pressing the broken button over and over again.
They got stuck.
Stress made them rigid. When we are anxious, when we feel profoundly unsafe, we retreat to what we know, even if it clearly doesn't work anymore. We stop exploring. We double down on the old rules.
And this obviously applies to adults, too. When we feel threatened, we lose our capacity for nuance.
Entirely. There was also the scarcity experiment with the morphing faces. This one really hit home regarding the link between economic stress and racism.
Tell us about that one.
Researchers showed participants a digital face on a screen that slowly, seamlessly morphed from white to black. They asked the people to press a button at the exact moment they felt the face was no longer white, essentially asking them to define exactly when the face became part of the outgroup.
And the results changed based on the context the participants were in.
Drastically. When participants were primed with a mindset of scarcity, when they were told beforehand that budgets were being cut, resources were low, the economy was tanking, they classified the mixed faces as black or other much earlier in the transition.
So when we feel financially poor or threatened, our circle of us physically shrinks in our minds.
Yes. Scarcity makes us exclusionary. The in-group becomes a much tighter, more defended fortress. This explains beautifully, though tragically, why economic downturns almost always coincide with rising xenophobia, nationalism, and anti-immigrant sentiment.
Because it isn't just a shift in politics, it is a biological reaction to perceived resource scarcity. The brain literally says there isn't enough for everyone, so we need to define everyone much more narrowly.
Precise.
That brings a really vital, compassionate lens to this whole discussion. It is so easy to look at people with rigid, highly exclusionary views and just get angry or judgmental. But this research suggests that for some, that rigidity is a deep biological response to pain, fear, or loneliness.
It is. There is actually a specific theory for this discussed in the sources called the social rejection theory. It steps away slightly from the pure neuroscience and looks at the social environment.
How does that work?
Imagine a child who is naturally a bit rigid. maybe due to their genetics. They are the kid on the playground who obsesses over the rules of the game. They end up ruining the fun because they simply can't handle a sudden change in how the game is played.
And kids can be cruel. Other kids don't want to play with someone who can't adapt.
Exactly. They get bullied or just completely ignored. They face intense social rejection early on. They are ostracized. And what does a lonely, rejected human being crave more than anything else in the world?
A longing, clarity, a sense of safety.
Yes. So as they grow up, they might actively seek out rigid ideologies. Fundamentalist religions, strict political factions, gang cultures, not just because of their dopamine receptors, but because those highly structured groups offer clear, unbreakable rules and a guaranteed community.
They finally find a place where the rules don't suddenly change on them, and where they are embraced as brothers and sisters.
There's a brilliant quote from the psychoanalyst Adam Phillips that captures the essence of this perfectly. He talks about narrowing the mind for freedom.
Narrowing the mind for freedom, that sounds like a complete paradox. How is making your mind smaller freeing?
Think about the crushing anxiety of infinite choice. The anxiety of living in a modern world where everything is relative, nothing is absolutely certain, and you have to decide every single moral and practical thing for yourself.
It is exhausting. It's the burden of modern freedom.
It is terrifying for many. By embracing a strict ideology, by purposefully narrowing your view of the world to a single, unshakable truth, you free yourself from that endless anxiety. You know exactly who you are, you know exactly who your enemy is, and you know exactly what you must do.
So for the socially rejected, the stressed, or the deeply confused, that intellectual constraint actually feels like profound liberation.
It does. It is a shelter.
That is incredibly heavy, but it makes so much intuitive sense. It shifts the entire conversation from a combative "these people are wrong" to a much more reflective "these people are seeking safety." It reminds me of why we started the Philosophy Cafe in the first place, to find that empathy hidden inside the complexity of the human condition.
And that reflection brings us right back to our bridge.
The bridge too far.
We started this deep dive by asking if neuroscience is a bridge too far for explaining our complex politics. And the verdict.
Well, perhaps it is. If we try to forcefully explain absolutely everything with biology, we know culture matters. Economics deeply matters. The specific history of a nation matters. You cannot just reduce something like the French Revolution to a collective dopamine fluctuation.
True. But the bridge is undeniably being built.
Yeah.
We can't pretend the biology isn't there anymore.
We can no longer ignore that our wiring, our dopamine levels, our stress responses, our ancient reactions to starvation or scarcity plays a massive, largely unconscious role in the ballot box. We are biological creatures first and political creatures second.
It is a humbling realization.
It definitely changes how I am going to look at my next heated argument with a relative. If they aren't listening, maybe it isn't just pure stubbornness or ignorance. Maybe they are deeply stressed. Maybe their brain is literally wired in that moment to protect their in-group because they feel fundamentally unsafe.
It invites us to replace our immediate judgment with a kind of biological empathy. If we can understand that the person sitting across from us might be experiencing an overwhelming biological imperative for certainty in a very uncertain world, it changes the entire temperature of the disagreement.
It doesn't mean you have to agree with their conclusions, of course.
No, but it helps you genuinely understand why they are shouting.
Which is such a powerful place to end our analysis today. So I want to leave you with a final thought to carry with you. We talked extensively about the Pharmakon, the trade-off. Flexible thinkers are creative, but perhaps less willing to sacrifice. Rigid thinkers are loyal but dogmatic.
The essential balance.
So imagine if you could take a pill tomorrow to tweak your own dopamine levels, to consciously turn the dial on your own cognitive rigidity. Would you take it?
That is a dangerous question.
Would you willingly trade some of your prized creativity and openness for that unshakable, deeply comforting sense of certainty and belonging? Or would you choose to keep the exhausting doubt if it meant keeping the open mind?
The best philosophical questions offer no easy answer.
They really don't. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We will save a seat for you at the cafe next time.
Until then, take care.